Hey there, Goa fans. This is Mark, DJ Solitaire, here with another episode of Retro Goa Explorations, my weekly series in which I share in each episode one of my favorite tracks from the 1990s Goa Trance psychedelic dance movement. Well, for episode 144, as we tip from the 22nd to the 23rd day of the year this year, I'm doing something a little bit different. Quite a few folks have asked me to expand on some of my experiences in the events and also how I came up with the name Solitaire. And so it's this last point, which ties in with the first point. It's, why Solitaire? What's this all about? It really ties in with some of the synchronicities and the experiences I was having as a dancer moving into being a DJ and the way the reverberations of my experiences in the scene were, impacting my life and my experience and how it is that I would think and be and express and so on. So let's get started with this. It's going to be a little bit of a different kind of episode, and there is going to be a piece of music at the end, which has some significance. So I've talked quite a bit about my first real Goa style event, October 15th, 1994, where after having gone to a couple of other dance events with friends and hearing some electronic music and being interested, I walked in and was completely blown away by the full spectrum, full concept that I seemed to be presented with, where there was UV lighting with UV decor, so that there was all these bright colors and a sort of a level of the spectrum beyond what it is that we normally see, where this music was fun and playful and absolutely did not sound like anything that came from this planet. One of the things that really struck me is, as a classical music guy, when you hear a violin or a piano or a trumpet or something like that, we have a visual of what instrument has made this. With this music, it was different. That interface was taken away, and so it was just the sound. And the sounds didn't correspond to a physical form per se. Now, of course, we can recognize that it's from a synthesizer, perhaps. And those of you who really know, it's like, oh, that's the 101 or that's the 303. That's another story. I was just hearing like sound and arrangements. And it really struck me that, this, what I could tell was possibly computerized music, sounded like we're in a computer, and simultaneously that we're in space and we're in this three-dimensional physical space, but it's also like we're in outer space and inner space and outer space, in a sense, perhaps being the same thing. I mean, it really, there was a lot of impressions that hit me all at once, and so it was pretty profound. Something I've not talked as much about. I did write a little bit about it in my tribute to Ollie, where I expanded on some of these themes. When I was 10 years old, I had a dream that it was in a futuristic city with lots of really colorful, bright lights. And it was there with my sister and her best friend and that friend's sister and a bunch of people. And we were sort of going around, and there was this really weird music that was playing. Well, my sister and those other two sisters, her friend and her sister, we were all living in Japan at the time that I went to this first event. And basically, this was like a kind of premonition, this experience and these sounds. I remember waking up and thinking, what was that? And they never forgot it. That was basically it. It was kind of this premonitory dream of being in this futuristic city, Tokyo, at night with all these lights and colors and hearing some strange music that we were moving around to. So, this event, I have no photos of this event. This Genki Batik, which, I sit behind in most of my episodes, or I sit on, is one that I saw. It was the first thing that I saw and recognized when I walked in. And Genki in Japanese means original spirit or source spirit or root energy or source energy. And, I didn't speak very good Japanese at the time, but I knew that word and I liked the concept. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Now, this music and this whole setting really hit me so powerfully that I wanted to understand because I was like, well, what the heck is this? This is really, appealing to a classical music nerd like me. And I saw there were a few people who were wearing, colorful clothing and really seemed to get the music. Like I could see how they moved to the music and how they got it. And I remember at one point, um, the music sort of slowed down and there were some spoken words and they were cheering. And I was like, okay, so like they recognize what's happening. Like they recognize this music. It was probably the hallucinogen track LSD. Same thing happened, interestingly, when I played at Azora at Pampui, and I sort of slowed down and sort of just led into those spoken words, and everybody lost it. So, but I remember that happening, and I remember there was this Japanese guy who was really cool. Like he had very, looked really fashionable, and like hairstyle, and he had, some, stickers, and he had like, there was one on his third eye, and he had these like really colorful clothing. And I was just sort of like, what is this clothing? Like it was just like the patterns. I remember, there were some stickers on there on his leggings. And it was just like, I could see it was looked like this kind of alien superhero outfit. And I went up to him to ask him, like, what are these clothes? And my Japanese was really bad at the time, and he didn't speak English. So he was just sort of pointing towards where actually the stage was. And I never saw Ollie that night. I actually didn't recognize him. There was this big sort of African American guy who was bouncing around. He was wearing black and white sort of fractal clothing. He was doing the lighting. And I actually really wasn't sure if it was like the sound light sort of live show kind of thing. I absolutely did not understand what was going on. So he just kind of pointed over there, and I went. I didn't see anything, and then later on that evening, I met David Dobson, who was importing. He had organized that party, and he was importing Space Drive clothing, but they'd all sold out that night. So we stayed in touch. I got my first clothes the following February when he got back from Bali with a fresh shipment. And so, but I knew I was like, okay, this guy with this clothing, he gets it. I was like, there's some kind of connection between the music and the mood color and the movement and all of that sort of stuff. So I was intrigued. Now I started going to parties regularly, and then I heard Tsuyoshi a month later at one of the Odyssey parties, and Odyssey started getting a little bit more. Those events every 2 weeks started getting a bit more of a Goa flavor that I could grasp and connect to and really get into. And so I was really curious about all of this, this whole scene and movement and what was this all about. So by the time the following summer comes around, I was pretty fully immersed in this. And I've talked before also about another party that took place in my second, autumn in the scene. So September 95, when the Equinox Party outfit did this event on a mountainside. It was like this clearing on a mountainside for the autumn equinox. And Kuni, who's, ran Tokyo Techno Tribe and was the main DJ for Equinox, he played the whole night. Started late and, just put on the DAT for, all of mystical experiences, and I was waiting for some dance music, and then eventually just like kicked. And I'll probably talk more about all of these individual parties another time, but this is all a long meandering roundabout into where the Solitaire name came from. So full on fire in the middle of this dance floor while we're in the middle of the forest, and it was just like unbelievable. No photos allowed. I saw them actually rip the film out of somebody's camera because they were very clear with no photos being allowed. And it's like full middle of the night. I remember like 3 in the morning or so. And I'm just sort of, was going around a little bit outside the dance area and coming back in, and walking towards me is that Japanese guy who I hadn't seen since that event, not just with full space drive, but this wild looking jester's cap. like full color, and it was like glowing in the light and really sharp, sleek lines. And he had this like giant staff, and it was like, no way, this is the coolest thing. Like I just thought he like it was just this amazing thing. Now I've always had a bit of an affinity with this Joker archetype. And when I was a kid, I had like a little Jack in the Box where the Joker would jump out, and there was somebody in my school who always said I had a Joker smile, a little bit like, the Batman Joker. Hopefully not exactly the same character, but there we go. So the Joker thing was familiar to me, and I just thought this looked cool. And by this point, I was like, full on space tribe, like, loved the clothes and that whole thing. And I was like, I want that hat. Anyway, we gave each other a big hug, and I was like, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing? And again, my Japanese was awful. He spoke no English, so it was just a nice hello. And then I found out that there was a lady there who sold Space Tribe clothes, and she also made these hats. And she had some that were there that were only two colors, but I wanted the full color one. So I commissioned one, and then I eventually got it. So I got my sort of um, jester's hat, and that became kind of a fixture for me. Now, again, how this looked in light, you can see in this photo that was taken a couple of years later, how things used to look with this glow in the dark, UV reactive kind of thing. It used to be really, it made quite an impression. Now, Ollie told me later what I suspected, which was, the philosophy, actually, the intention was to increase the visible spectrum for your eyes and to see more than you normally see in your regular life, right? And, really with this music that goes beyond the normal parameters that we're used to, and everything else with this kind of psychedelic scene that goes beyond that, it was really about these, expanding these parameters, starting to question things, starting to see things differently. So that was kind of the main thing, the first step. So this is autumn of 95, I get this whole situation and really get into, more and more into the whole scene and the music and this, collecting more and listening more and really trying to hear this how these stories were being put together. So a lot of people have commented on, my memory for recognizing tracks. And this was because I was collecting at home, I was listening, I'm a musician. I've got a really good memory, really sharp ears. I'm really good with pattern recognition and how things fit together. And so I was really, on the dance floor, I was really paying attention and listening. I was losing myself and simultaneously finding myself and, really hearing how emotions and thoughts and everything shifted with the patterns in the music and with what was going on at what time of night, with the darkness and then the light coming and so on. So, it was clear that the DJ was not just a DJ. There was a kind of a shamanic storytelling happening. And I know some of these words have gotten a little bit cliche at this point, but that's what it was. And that's what it can be. And what I think it is sort of at the root of it. So, I'm getting more and more into philosophy, questioning things, exploring, what are the normal parameters for how we see reality and not. And, the book Sophie's World was popular at the time. It was Real History of Philosophy. And I read that. And then April or so, is it probably a bit before April 96? Because I'm sure I got this before I went to India that month. But in 96, I know the English version was only published in 96. There's this book that I stumbled across called The Solitaire Mystery. And this is written by the author of Sophie's World. And I started reading this book, which is each chapter is one card from a deck of cards. And the central chapter is about the Joker. And the whole story revolves, there's a story within a story. And there's this weird interaction that's going on between this story that took place in the past and what's happening. And somebody reading this this kid reading this little book with this magnifying glass that he got given, which came from a fish tank with this goldfish, and there's all this all this imagery and iconography and so on. I'm not going to go into all of the levels of the details, but there's a few things that I'll share. And so I'm reading this book, and it's like the stuff around this Joker, and my being drawn to that that hat and that image, like just the instant. It was like one of those instant flashes, right? Just like my experience with the music and that premonitory dream and everything feeding that. And so I'm reading this book and getting my mind kind of blown by some things here. So I'm going to pull up a couple of little bits here. Starting on page 144, which is nice since we're in episode 144. So what happened in this story is part of the backstory is there was this soldier or the sailor who got shipwrecked, and all he had was his deck of cards, and he was really lonely, and he played the game Solitaire a lot, right? So Solitaire is this card game, right, where you sort of put out cards and you arrange them in these spreads. And so I thought, oh, okay, that's kind of neat. And I start reading this, and there's a fascinating thing here, where the cards came to life. All of a sudden, this man is living alone on an island, and there's these other beings that start showing up into the cards that had come to life. And so he'd imagined, this relationship with these cards, and then all of a sudden, he saw in the outer world things happening. And he's talking about the fact that these beings were somehow unaware. They were unaware that they'd been created by him. But there was another element here. There was something inside them which didn't allow them to see that in reality they were my own brain children. Of course, it's the same with all our thoughts. Nothing of what we create in our minds is aware of itself. So then these 52 cards existed, but years later, a Joker shows up. And he'd forgotten that there's a Joker because he just had these 4 suits of 13 cards, and there were these beings that were alive, and then all of a sudden there's a Joker. So he says the Solitaire was complete as early as 30 or 40 years ago with 52 figures. There was only one exception. Joker was an addition who first showed up on the island 16 or 17 years ago. The time frame doesn't really matter here, but he was a troublemaker who interrupted the idyll just when we had all grown used to our new existence. So, I think a lot of us experienced in this scene, we're just going along, we're not really questioning what's going on in our lives, or we might be, but then all of a sudden we end up in this completely different framework, and like, wait a second, there's like, we're starting to question, where do we come from? Whose brain children might we be? What story might we be living in? And who's writing it? Is it free will, or, right? Choose your own adventure. So another little bit here. When he's talking about the 52 primary 52 figures who had come to life, says there was one thing they all had in common. None of them asked about who they were or where they came from. In this way, they were one with nature. They just existed in the lush garden, right? Reference to the Garden of Eden, which there's another one coming. As bold and carefree as the animals, but then the Joker arrived. He stole into the village like a poisonous snake. Reference to the snake with, the tree of knowledge and self-consciousness and self-awareness. So what starts to happen is this Joker starts questioning reality and saying, there's this pattern, there's a structure here that's just like a little too logical. There's 4 suits with 13 each. Like, why is there this perfect design to how everything is constructed? Where does all of this come from? Now, later on in the book, they talk about the fact that if you do the math, 13 times 4 is 52. There's 52 weeks a year. Now, if you give 1 week to each of those, you do that 52 times 7, you get 364, but there's 1 day left over. And that in the book became Joker Day. Now it's interesting because in the Mayan calendar it's the same thing, and they have the day out of time. So every 2 years, they have two Joker days. And in the book, what they have is every 2 years, there's a banquet, the Joker banquet, where they play the Joker game. And what happens is each of the cards for for the 4 years comes up with one sentence. And they all go through and everybody shares their sentence and they create their sentence individually without knowing anything about what anybody else is doing. And the Joker listens to all of these sentences and he rearranges the cards just like you have, a solitaire spread. And he rearranges all of the sentences so that they make a story. And it started striking me, what does a DJ do? You take this piece of music that somebody's created on their own, sometimes more than one musician, but ostensibly there's this one story, there's this one piece of information, this one sentence. And what you're doing is you're arranging all these different pieces of music so it tells a story. It tells a bigger story. So I started to see like the connections between this, what's this Joker game was and what the DJ was doing, what the musician was doing. So I had started DJing. I moved to London soon after getting this book and then found an autographed copy while I was there. So I'm pretty sure this is one of my autographed ones. Yeah, there we go. So I was like kind of really into this. And I was known for, I had this Joker's cap and it was very visible, right? In all of this and in all of that. But the name Solitaire didn't really click yet because I started playing more, it was all underground, small stuff. The name didn't strike me. But then when I had my first gig after moving back to Japan in 98, where, I kept this book and I would reread it occasionally. And, I started to put more and more together and I decided I needed a DJ name and just came up with Solitaire. And so, the first event that I played at in May 23rd, 1998, it was just the name Solitaire. Now, you can look at, there's photos of me at the event and you can see sort of, I had my bags of DATs there because there wasn't always space to line things up. But when I did have the space, what I would do is I would arrange the DATs in sort of these spreads. And I realized it kind of looks like a solitaire card spread. Like when you're putting the cards down, and you're taking these tapes that have these sentences on them, these stories, and these which represent these tracks, which is, this message, and putting them in this sequence. And so I at that event, there's a few things that happened. I started off with this track that we'll be exploring later, this ambient track, and my plan was to start with this short ambient introduction, which also relates to a story and free will and all kinds of stuff, and then lead into Spawn by the Beast. I had the CD promo of Doom Entertainment from Twisted, and then found out that the CD player hadn't been hooked up. Panic, 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 and then find something else to throw on and get it on DAT. So that was Maya from Pleiadians. And then it was just like my whole sense of what I was going to do got completely blown apart. And there's a photo of me like panicking. I remember when the flash went off. I remember having this brain. I was like, I need to see what to do next, what to play next. And then this flash from the camera came off, and I look at this DAT in front of me and see Feel the Universe. And I was like, well, I just felt the universe there. So maybe I'll go for that. And I did. And that's when I just felt like I was back on track. And then I just went sentence by sentence, story by story, like in a sense, like track by track. That's all I did. There was no real sense at where I was going to go. It was just one sentence at a time. So one piece of music at a time, the spontaneous. And I just got into this interactive state with the whole process. So, that just the name stuck. I stuck with his name, Solitaire. In terms of spelling it, the first time it got spelled with one I was the next Spectrum party that I played at a couple of months later over here. And I think it was a typo because I've got other flyers later on where the spelling is still really, just the normal spelling of the card game. And at the time, hip hop DJs and a lot of DJs would adjust spelling of their names and so on. And for me, it turned into, I eventually removed it so that it, changed it so that it only has one I, because there was the more metaphysical aspect of, the creator and the creation being one I, oneself, and everybody, us being one, and just this unified self. And so I could see just looking at flyers that by about 2001, I think it was the first time that I really, it was consistently spelled like that. Of course, sometimes people have misspelled it and has been, two eyes, and that's fine. I almost wish I could change it back, but it sort of stands apart a little bit because now, you Google solitaire, and of course, it always goes to the card game and so on and so forth. But so I started getting, more and more into this whole concept that when you're at the party, there really is that sense of story. And the DJ is kind of, setting the energy and setting the parameters of this story that then goes into your life. And you then step out of that particular story and back into your life. And there's still the echoes and the effects of the story that are impacting you. But it just got into, I started having these effects where things were bleeding into my reality. So, for example, I shared the book with a friend who came to events as well. And she was reading about, there was this part about this goldfish. And, she's walking down the street that day, and somebody, in Japan, they give you these free fans, like to advertise for stuff. And she gets given this, fan with a goldfish. And she's like, I was just reading about that. What's going on? This is the actual one she gave me back in 98. So there was this whole sense of, we have these experiences, we adjust, and then we adapt and we integrate. And I started looking for messages and everything and seeing messages and everything and seeing this interactivity. And it was just sort of like, whoa, what is this kind of storytelling that we also go through in our lives, right? How do we see our brain children in the world around us? And so it became a little bit like, analogous to what was happening in that story with, this guy imagining these characters, these cards, and then they come to life. And, looking at our capacity for manifestation and our consciousness and, what can we imagine and then what can happen? And we all had this sense, really, of the magic of the scene back then that we can change the world because we're becoming better people and we're sort of letting go of our inhibitions and we're in this safe space. So and that people can just really become better people through this. I still like to believe that. Of course, we've all seen that it hasn't completely gone that way, but I still hold on. I'm pretty idealistic, and I still hold on to the fact that there is this capacity. Okay, so there's a few more notes that I've made that I just want to sort of touch in on and make sure I don't forget, because as you can see, there's a lot to this. Um, on a page, I made a note 212 in the book. There's this very interesting sentence here. There's always a joker to see through the delusion. The one who sees through destiny must also live through it. Those were two sentences that, different cards had made that the Joker then put into sequence. And this is kind of it, that, the Joker archetype sees through. He's the only one who can name the truth, in the court, and does it with humor but there's depth to it, and there's a bit of a cutting through the BS. And certainly something that I like to do. I can't say that I always do it, but it's definitely an intention of, I can see patterns and I can see and I'm very good with pattern recognition. I use that a lot in my different avenues of work. And, seeing what works and what doesn't work. And with a little bit of humor, pointing out, maybe this is aligned, maybe it's not. But you can see through. This is something that I think we've all experienced. You can see through the illusions of reality that, am I just this being in this body or is there more? But you still have to live through it. So you still have to live your life. And that's the thing. We do these events and we go through these wonderful experiences. And then you still, go back home and you have a shower and you do your things. You have to wash dishes. You have to make food. You still have to do these things. You still have to live through it. So as much as we can come into contact with magic and so on, there's still a grounded reality that we're living in. So I think that's really important to remember, and that's kind of part of it. So it's kind of this is where they talk about, the solitaire. There's a line here is a bit of a curse because you see through the reality, but you still have to live in the reality. Now, things took another interesting turn because, it never stops. Um, I became closer with Ollie as he came to Vancouver quite regularly. And we were really lucky. There's not much of a Goa scene here, but Ollie came here quite a bit. And so, if he first came here, I think it was 2004, sort of first time meeting him after the 90s. And, he was still, kind of, I still idolized this guy. And then he was coming more regularly, and we knew each other. And I saw him, and he asked when I was visiting London, "Hey, why don't you come over?" And so and I saw him several times, and he came to Vancouver like at least 5 or 6 times in between 2010 and 2018 or 19. So the last time I saw him, we were out and about. I was driving, him and Max around, and we stopped somewhere to sort of just sit outside. He wanted to smoke, and he just sat next to me, and he had a tank top on. It was a nice hot summer day, and I see that he's got a tattoo of a Joker on his arm. And I was like, what? Wait a second. Like, he's seen me in this. And I see that, he's got this jester tattoo. And I was like, well, what's the deal with that? He's like, oh, well, I mean, the Joker archetype, the one who sort of sees through all the illusion and, delivers truth with humor and blah, blah. He starts like going through all of the same stuff, that the archetype. But, this was he's the DJ who played the first event where I saw this clothing, and then that guy from that event is the one who had the hat, and they got me into this whole thing. And this all, of course, those sounds and everything like that were showed up in this dream of mine when I was 10, at a time when, I also was being told at school that I had this Joker smile, and this was just all like, what story are we all living in? What's being written? Are we writing it? Someone else writing it? And we're just avatars acting this out? What level of free will? What level of whatever do we have going on? And that's kind of what this story is about, and what I think some of the awakening that we have at these musical events can be. And if the storyteller sets the space well with the music, and you have to say, with the events being set with the right energy, so that the musicians can do that, and so that the energy set of that whole place is like a clean page in a book, then what's the story that can be written and then lived and experienced by the people on the dance floor? And so, for me, it was just kind of like this, these sounds coming from above and from around is a little bit like the writing of, where the thought's coming from. Is this thought coming from that particular sound in the synthesizer, or, this whoosh, this whatever, the zap or the sound or whoosh or whatever it is that I'm hearing? Is this what's creating my thoughts? Are my thoughts in reaction to it? You know, is it free will? Is it pre-written? Here I am in the present moment. That hasn't happened before, or has it? Since I had this dream when I was 10 and then sort of wake up in this club 14 years later. Um, it all becomes quite mysterious, right? Hence the solitaire mystery. So, I didn't choose this. Nobody, in a sense, it was certainly there was some resistance on my part when I first started getting into this because I felt this draw that, I'm a classical music guy, right? Heavily, very heavily, and I still am, and I'm not sure how much people know. I write for very serious music magazines and present at universities and so on, right? I am an expert in that field. And there was this irresistible lure by this. There was something in this scene that drew me to it. And some of it is beyond the musical scene because it really is about pattern recognition and what I do with feng shui and other sort of trainings that I have and modalities that I work in. But there's this real mystery of we've all been, I think, those of us in this scene, we've heard the siren call, the sort of the seductive magnetic allure of some kind of memory that we vaguely but don't quite fully have from somewhere else that this music reminds us of. And I think that is what I aim to stimulate and bring into my sets as I go through that sort of organic process of set construction and the various ways that I put tracks together to make a story. I'm very cautious about any spoken words in the tracks that I use. If there's a sample I don't like, or I don't like the words and what that's going to do, I won't play the track. Of course, if there's other things in the tracks that I don't like, I also won't play them. I don't play things just because it's a hit. It has to be musically, stable and cohesive. But that whole storytelling and something I bring, I think, from my classical background, which is, how I'm specialized in piano, how pianists would arrange these pieces of music in the recital program and how one would lead into the other. That was always something that I, observed and that I think has served how it is that I create stories with this music. But the bigger piece is what our consciousness gets to experience and how we can evolve and how we can open up and see beyond patterns. One of the challenges I find that we've got now is people listen to this music almost too much. You listen at home on these tiny little speakers or on, sort of computer speakers that are like that big, instead of listening to it, under the stars on these massive sound systems, where the experience is very, very different. And so, back in my early years, I'm still very, very marked by the imprinting of that experience of I have to go to this event to hear it, and then trying to figure out what's going on, but also losing myself in the moment in the experience of that dance experience. So there's this long arc, right, which ended with in a sense, the culmination of, gosh, how many years later was that? Was it 24 years later after hearing Ollie for the first time that I found out he had that Joker tattoo on his arm? I mean, just absolutely mind-blowing stuff. And again, I don't know who's writing this. I don't know, how these symbols show up, how these brain children of ours sort of, show up, or, in our outside world, or how we have shown up outside of some consciousness that has brainchilded us, right, that has thought us into being. But that's part of the mystery, and we get to dance along with it and maybe figure it out, maybe don't, and just enjoy the dance. So what I thought I would end with here, because I've been blabbing a lot, and I was like, oh, there's no real dance track that I can think of to tie this in. But I think the first ambient track that I started, the first set that I played as Solitaire, at that Spectrum party in May 23rd, 98. Of course, it was May 24th by the time I started because I started at about 3 in the morning. Um, this was a track by Astralasia. It was the first track on this CD. Now, I remember I was at the Wave shop in Shibuya, so not Cisco, but at this other shop, and bumped into Jay, who was DJ Spoo from the Odyssey parties. And we were looking at the CDs together, just bumped into him by chance. And he saw this and he said, "Buy this. If you don't like it, I will pay it. I'll give you your money back. But trust me, you're going to love it." And he said, I've tried pitching this stuff up, and to sort of see if I can play it on the dance floor because I'd love to play it, and just say it. Yeah, I can't get it to the right speed for that to be workable. But he said it's just the most amazing music. And sure enough, this became a major part of some of my solo, not solitaire, but solo explorations when I would just go to the park and put on music and just listen and journal and do whatever or walk around. And I mean, this is magical, magical music. And I think the spoken sample at the beginning and the words throughout also carry a little bit of a message that also ties in with what it is that I've been talking about. Okay, so I'm going to play the first track. And it's funny because, as much as I'm into, my memory of all these tracks and all of these things, I also was just used to listen to the CD. I never paid attention to any of the track titles on here because it was just like, that's track one, that's track five, that's track. I just knew, I know this whole sequence really, really well. That it's Astral Navigation is the first track here by Astralasia. So there we go. Hopefully haven't bored you too much with this exploration. And what I'm hoping this will stimulate is some memories of your first experiences at the scene, going to these events, uh, and the magic and the synchronicity and the things that would show up in your life and your connection of your thoughts and your emotions to the music and what it is that you brought into your daily life and still do. And, now that it's become so much of a routine, the risk through hedonic adaptation, which is this experience that we have where something we experience more often becomes normalized. We've become a little too habituated, I think, to go to the party and dance and listen to the music, and there's a person there and they're playing, and it's like, no, it's the magic. Forget about the person on the stage. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz, and just have the magic. And have the magic. The magic is also not out there. The magic is inside, and your relationship and your consciousness and emotional and spiritual and sort of full body, full system interaction with the present moment, with sound, color, space, and all of it. So, on that note, I will leave you now, wrap up episode 144 of Retro Goa Explorations, and leave you with the first track that I ever hit the play button with using the name Solitaire by Astralasia, Astral Navigation.
You must think of this as a trip, a sort of voyage of discovery. On the way, we'll find out many fascinating things about it. And in the end, you will no longer be disturbed or troubled, because you will be you. You've placed yourself in my hands. I'm the pilot, you're the passenger. But instead of going forward to space, we're going backwards, time.
An astral body.